The Grand Forum was the largest structure ever built by any living species. It floated in the empty black between stars, a station so massive that small moons could fit inside its outer ring. 4,000 species sent their representatives here. 4,000 flags hung from the ceiling of the central chamber, each one representing a civilization that had earned its place among the stars. Earth's flag hung near the bottom, smaller than the rest, tucked into a corner where the light barely reached it. Taeho stood alone at the speaker's pulpit. He was a tall man with a calm face and steady hands. He wore a dark suit with no medals, no decorations, nothing to make him look important. Around him, the forum stretched upward like the inside of a cathedral. Rows and rows of alien delegates rising into the shadows above. Thousands of eyes looked down at him. Some were curious. Most were bored. A few were already amused. Earth had held a seat on the Galactic Council for only 40 years. In a room full of civilizations that had existed for tens of thousands of years, 40 years was nothing. It was less than nothing. It was a joke. And today, Taeho was about to ask this room full of ancient empires to treat humanity as an equal. He touched the control panel on the pulpit, and a holographic display appeared in the air above him, showing Earth's formal petition: equal voting rights, access to the major trade corridors that connected the wealthy parts of the galaxy, and most importantly, the removal of the label that had been stamped on humanity since the day they joined the Council: developmental species. Two words that meant Earth was considered too young, too primitive, and too weak to be trusted with real power. Taeho spoke clearly. He talked about what humanity had accomplished in just 4 decades. They had built colonies on 6 worlds. They had developed faster-than-light travel using their own research, not borrowed technology. They had signed every treaty the Council had asked them to sign. They had followed every rule. They had been patient, cooperative, and respectful. He asked, simply and directly, for the Council to recognize Earth as a full and equal member. When he finished, the forum was quiet for a moment. Then a sound began somewhere in the upper rows. It was a low, rumbling noise, like stones grinding together. It took Taeho a second to realize what it was. Laughter. The Korvathi delegation was laughing. Marshal Otgan stood up from his seat in the middle tiers. He was enormous, even by the standards of his species. The Korvathi were built like walking fortresses, with thick gray skin and 4 arms that could crush steel. Otgan was their military commander, a creature who had personally led the destruction of 2 rebellious species and felt no shame about it. He walked slowly to the speaking platform opposite Taeho and activated his own display. Earth's military profile appeared in the air for everyone to see. 300 ships, a small defense grid around their home system, weapons that were considered outdated by galactic standards 2 centuries ago. Otgan looked at the display, then looked at Taeho, and then he spoke to the entire forum. His voice was deep and carried easily through the massive chamber. He called humanity brave. He said it almost kindly. Then he called them foolish. He said that Earth was like a small animal that had wandered into a room full of predators and was now asking to be treated as one of them. He pointed at the military display and asked the forum if this was the profile of an equal. He called humans brave little insects trying to sit at the table of gods. The forum laughed again. This time it was louder. It came from every direction, from dozens of species, in dozens of different sounds, all meaning the same thing: mockery. Taeho did not move. He did not look away. He stood at the pulpit with his hands at his sides and his face completely still, and he let them laugh. He let every second of it burn into his memory. Vorethi Prime Aldis, the supreme speaker of the council, called for the vote. Aldis was ancient even by galactic standards, an insectoid being with a body like polished black armor, and eyes that reflected light like broken glass. He had led the council for over 300 years, and his word was considered final on almost every matter. The vote was not close. Earth's petition was denied by an overwhelming majority. Only 11 species out of more than 4,000 voted in humanity's favor. 11. But Aldous was not finished. He announced that the council had also approved a new measure, the Ashara Mandate. Under this mandate, Earth's colonization rights were reduced to only 3 additional star systems. Their fleet size was capped at its current number, and any attempt to expand beyond these limits would be considered an act of aggression against the council itself. They had not just said no to humanity. They had put humanity in a cage and locked the door. Tejo accepted the decision with a polite nod. He thanked the council for its time. He stepped down from the pulpit and walked through the long corridor that led back to the human delegation's small section of the station. He walked slowly, with his back straight, and he did not look at anyone. He was almost at his shuttle when a voice called out to him from a side corridor. It was soft, almost a whisper. She was a Filani, tall and slender with silver skin and large dark eyes that always seemed sad. She was one of the 11 who had voted for Earth. She and Tejo had spoken before, carefully and in private, over the past several years. She was one of the few aliens who did not look at humans with contempt. She told him something that the public vote had not revealed. The Korvathi and 2 other powerful dominions had been meeting in secret for months. They were not satisfied with just restricting Earth. They wanted Earth's council seat revoked entirely. They wanted humanity pushed back to their home system and kept there permanently. They saw humans not as weak, but as something worse. They saw humans as a species that grew too fast, learned too quickly, and would one day become a threat if they were not stopped now. Lissari told him she was sorry. She said she had done everything she could. Tejo looked at her for a long moment. Then he thanked her, genuinely, and told her she should distance herself from Earth in the coming days. When she asked why, he did not answer. He boarded his shuttle alone. He sat in the pilot's chair and stared through the viewport at the massive shape of the Grand Forum hanging in space, lit up like a city, full of species that had just decided humanity did not matter. He sat there for a long time. Then he opened a secure communication channel. It was encrypted on a quantum level, completely unbreakable, routed through a network that no alien species even knew existed. On the other end was Admiral Yuna, waiting in a command center buried deep beneath the Pacific Ocean on Earth. Tejo spoke one sentence: "Open the vaults." Then he closed the channel, started the shuttle's engines, and turned toward home. Behind him, the Grand Forum continued to glow in the darkness, and inside it, 4,000 species went about their business, already forgetting the quiet human who had stood at the pulpit and asked to be treated as an equal. They would remember him soon enough. 72 hours after the vote, the most powerful people on Earth sat in a room that did not officially exist. The War Cabinet chamber was buried 3 kilometers beneath the floor of the Pacific Ocean, inside a bunker that had been built in secret over the course of 20 years. It was not on any map. It was not in any government record. The ocean above it was dark and cold and heavy, and the people sitting around the long table inside it carried a weight that was even heavier. Admiral Yuna sat at the head of the table. She was a small woman with short black hair and eyes that never seemed to blink. She had commanded Earth's Navy for 11 years, and in that time, not a single officer under her command had ever seen her raise her voice. She did not need to. When Yuna spoke, people listened, because they understood that behind her quiet voice was a mind that thought about war the way a surgeon thinks about a body. Every move planned long before the blade touched skin. She pressed a button on the table, and the recording from the Grand Forum played on a screen that covered the entire far wall. They all watched it, Every word, every laugh, every moment of Otgon's speech, the vote, the Ashara mandate, Tejo standing alone at the pulpit, while the galaxy told him he was nothing. When the recording ended, no one spoke for a full minute. The silence was so thick, it felt like pressure against the skin. Then Tejo, who had arrived back on Earth only hours ago, and had not slept since, stood up and said what everyone in the room already knew. Diplomacy was over. It had been over the moment the council laughed. Perhaps it had been over long before that, and they had simply been too hopeful to see it. The galaxy did not respect words. It did not respect patience, or good behavior, or signed agreements. It respected one thing, and one thing only, and that was power so overwhelming that no one would dare to test it. Yuna nodded once, and turned to the man sitting at the far end of the table. Jinho was the director of Helix, which stood for Humanity's Experimental Lethality and Innovation Division. On paper, Helix did not exist. In reality, it was the largest and most secret research program in human history, spread across dozens of hidden facilities inside asteroid belts, on the dark sides of moons, and in stations buried so deep inside gas giants that no alien sensor could detect them. Jinho was a thin man with gray at his temples, and the kind of calm that came from spending decades surrounded by weapons that could end civilizations. He stood up and began to speak, and what he said changed the temperature of the room. For 40 years, Earth had publicly obeyed every treaty the Galactic Council had imposed on them. Technology restriction pacts, colonization boundaries. Humanity had signed them all with polite smiles and firm handshakes, and the galaxy had believed that humans were obedient. They were wrong. Behind the smiles and the signatures, Helix had been building. Every treaty Earth signed in public, Helix broke in private. Every weapon the Council banned, Helix developed in the dark. Every technology the galactic community considered too dangerous to exist, Helix had already built, tested, and stored away, waiting for the day when the masks would come off. Jinho listed the projects one by one. Project Nidhogg, a weapon that could generate an electromagnetic pulse so powerful that it could shut down every piece of technology in an entire star system at once. Ships, stations, communication networks, life support systems, all of it, gone in a single flash. One weapon, one activation. An entire system brought to its knees without firing a single shot. Project Fenrir. Autonomous warship swarms controlled by artificial intelligence so advanced that it made the best alien combat computers look like children's toys. These ships could think, adapt, coordinate, and fight without any human input at all. Thousands of them, stored in hidden hangars across the solar system, waiting to be unleashed. And then there was one more. Project Exodus. Jinho paused before this one and looked across the table at a woman who had been sitting quietly in the corner, watching everything with dark, thoughtful eyes. Soha was the lead scientist of Project Exodus, and she was the only person at the table who did not look angry or determined or afraid. She looked patient, the way someone looks when they have been carrying a secret so large that they have grown used to its weight. Jinho said only that Exodus was not yet ready to be discussed, and that its details were classified, even within Helix. Soha nodded slightly and said nothing. The room processed all of this in heavy silence. Then Yuna turned to Hana, who sat across from Jinho with a tablet in her hands and a faint smile on her face that never quite reached her eyes. Hana was Earth's intelligence chief, and she ran a network of spies, informants, and sleeper agents that stretched across 19 alien homeworlds. She had been building this network for 15 years, placing agents in alien governments, military commands, trade organizations, and scientific institutions. Some of her agents were human. Some were aliens who had been quietly recruited through bribes, blackmail or genuine sympathy for Earth's situation. Hana reported that her network was fully operational and awaiting instructions. She could, at a moment's notice, begin feeding misinformation to alien governments, disrupting their communications, or leaking carefully chosen pieces of intelligence designed to create confusion and fear. She had been preparing for this exact day since the moment she took the job. Taeho laid out the plan. It was simple in concept and terrifying in execution. Earth would withdraw from every single treaty it had ever signed with the Galactic Council. Every arms limitation, every territorial agreement, every trade deal, every diplomatic accord, the Ashara Mandate, all of it. Every signature humanity had ever put on a galactic document would be declared void simultaneously, without warning and without explanation. The room voted. It was unanimous. The formal notice of withdrawal was prepared within hours. It was a document of extraordinary simplicity. It listed every treaty Earth had signed over the past 40 years, hundreds of them, and next to each one was a single word: void. No explanation, no justification, no threats, no demands. Just that one word, repeated over and over like a drumbeat. At exactly midnight, Earth Standard Time, the document was transmitted to the Galactic Council through official diplomatic channels. It arrived at the Grand Forum's communication array and was automatically distributed to every delegation simultaneously. Across the galaxy, diplomats and officials opened the message, expecting routine correspondence. What they found instead was a species tearing up 40 years of agreements in a single night, and offering nothing in return but silence. On the council station, Lissari was in her quarters when her personal display chimed with the incoming transmission. She opened it and read through the list, treaty after treaty after treaty, all marked with that same cold word. Her hands began to shake. She had warned Taeho. She had told him about the secret plans to cage humanity even further. She had hoped he would find a diplomatic solution, some clever political maneuver to protect Earth within the system. This was not a diplomatic solution. This was something else entirely. This was a door being kicked open in the middle of the night. She set down the display and walked to her window. Outside, the Grand Forum turned slowly in the void, its lights reflecting off the hulls of thousands of docked ships from across the galaxy. "What have they done?" she whispered to the glass. And far away, on a blue planet orbiting a small yellow star, the lights in a bunker beneath the ocean stayed on through the night, and the people inside it began to prepare for what came next. They moved with purpose and precision, and the kind of energy that comes from decades of waiting finally coming to an end. Earth had been silent for 40 years. The silence was over. The first reaction from the Galactic Council was confusion. The second was amusement. The third, which came much later and much too slowly, was fear. When the treaty withdrawal notice reached the Grand Forum, most delegations treated it the way they treated everything Earth did. They glanced at it, made a comment about the strange behavior of young species, and went back to their own business. A few of the more politically aware delegates raised their brows, or their equivalent body parts, and noted that it was unusual, but no one was alarmed. Earth was small. Earth was weak. What could they possibly do? Vorathi Prime Aldis addressed the council 2 days after the notice arrived. He stood at his elevated platform, his black insectoid body gleaming under the forum lights, and he called humanity's withdrawal the tantrum of a child species. He said that Earth would come crawling back within weeks, begging to be let back into the treaties that protected them. He authorized an immediate economic blockade of the Sol system. No trade ships in or out. No resource transfers. No communication relays. Earth would be isolated until it remembered its place. Marshal Otgon went further. He stood before the Korvathi High Command and argued that a military correction was needed. Not an invasion, nothing so dramatic. Just a fleet, a large one, sent to the edge of human space to remind Earth what real power looked like. It was a tactic the Korvathi had used many times before on species that forgot their station. A show of force, a reminder. Every time they had done it, the target species had backed down within days. The Korvathi Dominion dispatched 200 warships toward the Sol system. They were heavy cruisers and battleships, each one larger than anything in Earth's known fleet. They moved through faster-than-light corridors in a formation that was designed to be seen on every sensor array in the region. This was not a secret mission. This was a message. The Korvathi wanted everyone to see what happened when a small species stepped out of line. The fleet took 9 days to reach the outer boundary of the Sol system. What they found when they arrived was not what they expected. The Korvathi fleet commander, a veteran officer who had led dozens of these intimidation missions over his long career, dropped his ships out of faster-than-light travel at the standard approach distance. His sensors immediately began scanning the area ahead of him, looking for the small, outdated human defense fleet that his intelligence reports said would be waiting. His sensor officer reported the results, and the bridge went quiet. There were not 300 human ships waiting for them. There were over 4,000. They filled the space ahead of the Korvathi fleet like a wall of steel and light, arranged in layered formations that showed careful planning and absolute confidence. And these were not the ships the galaxy had seen before. These were something new. They were sleek and angular, built with a design philosophy that looked nothing like anything in galactic records. Their hulls were dark, almost black, and they radiated energy signatures that the Korvathi sensors could not identify or classify. The Korvathi fleet commander stared at his display for a long time. Then he ordered his communications officer to open a channel to the human fleet. On the other side of that wall of ships, Lieutenant Dowan sat in the cockpit of a new class destroyer and watched the Korvathi fleet through his viewport. He was 26 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, he had been stationed at a training facility on Mars, running routine patrol simulations. Then the orders had come through, and everything had changed. He had been transferred to a ship he had never seen before, given a uniform he did not recognize, and told to report to a fleet that was not supposed to exist. The ship he sat in now was faster than anything he had ever flown. Its weapon systems were so advanced that the training manual was still classified at every level above his rank. He had been flying it for less than 2 weeks, and he already understood that this ship could destroy anything the galaxy had ever built. He watched the Korvathi fleet hanging in space ahead of him, and he could see even from this distance that they had stopped moving. They were just sitting there. Their formation had loosened, which meant they were confused. Confused ships made mistakes, and Dowan's hands were steady on the controls, ready for whatever came next. Not from the Korvathi. Admiral Yuna's voice came through the fleet-wide channel, calm and clear, the same voice that had briefed them all before departure. She ordered the fleet to hold position and maintain target locks. No one was to fire unless fired upon. This was not going to be a battle. This was going to be a lesson. She opened a single communication channel to the Korvathi fleet commander. She did not greet him. She did not introduce herself. She simply transmitted a data packet. Inside that packet was a complete sensor readout from Earth's fleet, showing that every single weapon system on every single human ship was locked onto a specific Korvathi target. 200 Korvathi warships, 200 individual target locks, every one of them confirmed and active. Then Yuna spoke. Her voice was flat, without emotion, without anger, without satisfaction. She told the Korvathi commander that he had 12 hours to withdraw his fleet from human space. She said this not as a negotiation or a request, but as a statement of fact, the way someone might state that water is wet or that fire burns. 12 hours, she said. There will not be a 13th. The channel closed. For 3 hours, the Korvathi fleet did nothing. Darwin could imagine the chaos on those alien bridges. The officers arguing, the commanders sending frantic messages back to the Korvathi homeworld, the intelligence analysts trying to understand how Earth had gone from 300 ships to 4,000 without anyone noticing. Then, slowly, the Korvathi fleet began to move, not forward, backward, one ship at a time, then in groups, then all at once. They turned and accelerated away from the Sol system. Within 6 hours, they were gone. For the first time in 600 years, a Korvathi military force had retreated without firing a single shot. The news spread across the galaxy faster than any fleet could travel. Communication networks carried the story from system to system, station to station, world to world. The details grew and shifted with each retelling, but the core of it remained the same. Earth had hidden an entire navy. Earth had weapons no one could identify. Earth had stared down the Korvathi, and the Korvathi had blinked. In the Grand Forum, the mood changed overnight. Species that had spent decades ignoring humanity were suddenly paying very close attention. Delegations that had laughed during Tejo's speech were now holding emergency meetings behind closed doors. The word that kept appearing in every conversation, in every language, in every corridor of the station was the same. How? How had they done it? How had they built all of this without anyone knowing? Lasari watched the panic spread through the council like a disease. She attended meetings where senior diplomats from powerful species argued about what to do, and she noticed something that frightened her more than anything else. They were not just surprised, they were ashamed. They had spent 40 years treating humanity like a pet, and now the pet had turned around and shown them teeth they never knew it had. That kind of surprise does not lead to respect, it leads to rage. And in the shadows, where no alien sensor could reach and no council spy could listen, Hana activated the second phase of her intelligence operation. Her agents, spread across 19 worlds, began to move. They did not steal secrets or sabotage systems. They did something far more effective. They leaked information. Small, carefully selected pieces of data about Earth's capabilities were placed where the right people would find them. A hint about Nidhogg here. A whisper about Fenrir there. Never enough to reveal the full picture. Just enough to make every species in the galaxy ask the same terrifying question. What else were the humans hiding? It was a question that no one could answer, and that was exactly the point. Because the only thing more frightening than knowing what your enemy can do is not knowing what your enemy can do. And right now, the entire galaxy was staring at Earth, and seeing, for the first time, not a small and harmless world, but a dark room full of things they could not see. Darwin sat in his cockpit after the Korvathi retreat and looked out at the empty space where 200 enemy warships had been floating just hours before. He was still young enough to feel the full weight of what had just happened, and old enough to understand that this was only the beginning. The galaxy had finally noticed Earth, and Earth was just getting started. The galaxy did what the galaxy always did when something scared it. It gathered its armies. In the 3 months following the Korvathi retreat, Vorethi Prime Aldous worked without rest. He reached out to every major power in the council, calling in favors that were centuries old, making promises he would never normally make, and using every tool of political pressure he had built over 300 years of leadership. The result was the Grand Coalition, a military alliance of the 12 most powerful species in the galaxy, united by a single purpose. Earth had to be stopped. The coalition assembled its fleet in a staging system called Varith III, a barren collection of dead planets and asteroid fields that had been used as a military gathering point for thousands of years. The numbers were staggering. 15,000 warships from 12 different species, carrying millions of soldiers, armed with weapons that represented the combined military knowledge of civilizations that had been waging war since before humans had learned to make fire. It was the largest military force ever assembled in the recorded history of the galaxy, and it was all pointed at one small blue planet, orbiting one ordinary yellow star. Marshal Otgon had been given command of the Coalition fleet. After his humiliation at the Sol system border, his own government had nearly removed him from power. But the formation of the Grand Coalition gave him a second chance, and he took it with both hands. He swore publicly that he would personally oversee the correction of humanity. He would not make the same mistake twice. This time, there would be no single fleet sent to intimidate. This time, the full weight of galactic civilization would fall on Earth like a hammer. On Earth, Tejo and Yuna watched the coalition form with the calm attention of people who had expected exactly this. Tejo had predicted it within days of the treaty withdrawal. He had told the War Cabinet that the galaxy's first response would be confusion, the second would be a small show of force, and the third would be overwhelming retaliation. He had been right about all three. But Tejo did not want a war. He had never wanted a war. He had stood at that pulpit in the Grand Forum and asked politely for equality, and he had meant every word of it. The fact that he was now planning military operations did not change what he was at his core. He was a diplomat, and a diplomat's job was not to win wars, but to make them unnecessary. He told Yuna and Jinho that what they needed was not a victory. Something so overwhelming, so impossible, and so terrifying that the very idea of fighting Earth would become unthinkable. Not just for now, but for generations. They needed to break the galaxy's willingness to fight without actually fighting. Jinho understood immediately. He said one word: Nidhogg. The plan was simple in the way that only truly devastating things can be simple. When the Coalition fleet finished gathering at Vera 3, a single human ship appeared at the edge of the system. It was small, barely the size of a patrol craft, unmarked and unremarkable. The Coalition sensor operators noticed it immediately, but dismissed it as a scout or a communications relay. Odgon himself glanced at the report and felt a flicker of contempt. One ship. The humans had sent one ship to face 15,000. He did not give the order to fire. He wanted to see what the humans were doing. It was the last strategic decision he would ever make. The small ship activated Project Nidhogg. What happened next took less than 3 seconds. A pulse of energy expanded outward from the human vessel at a speed that should not have been possible. It washed over the Vera 3 system like a wave washing over sand, and everything it touched went dark. Every ship, every station, every satellite, every communication array, every sensor platform, every weapon system, every engine, every life support unit. 15,000 warships, the greatest fleet in galactic history, went completely and totally dead in the time it takes a human heart to beat 3 times. The lights went out on every bridge. The engines stopped. The weapons powered down. The artificial gravity failed, and millions of soldiers began to float in the darkness of their own ships, unable to see, unable to communicate, unable to do anything at all. Otgon floated in the black of his command deck, surrounded by the sounds of his crew shouting and the slow groan of a ship that was dying around him. Life support had failed. The air would last for hours, maybe less on the smaller ships. The cold of space would follow. 15,000 ships, 1 pulse, 3 seconds, and then the human fleet arrived. They came out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation, 4,000 ships spreading across the Vera 3 system, in a pattern that covered every sector, every cluster of disabled vessels, every drifting hulk. And they did something that no one in the Coalition fleet expected. They began to rescue them. Yuna had given the order before the fleet even departed Earth. Every ship carried extra life support supplies, medical equipment, emergency oxygen, and towing cables. Human crews in emergency suits began cutting their way into disabled coalition warships, pulling out suffocating soldiers, stabilizing failing life support systems, and setting up temporary shelters inside the largest vessels. Medical teams treated the injured. Engineers restored basic power to ships that were in the worst condition. Supply shuttles moved between the dead fleet like bees moving between flowers, delivering air and water and warmth to species that had come to destroy them. Darwin was part of one of the rescue teams. He and his crew boarded a Korvathi heavy cruiser that had lost all power, and they found hundreds of Korvathi soldiers floating in the dark, some unconscious, some barely breathing. The Korvathi were enormous compared to humans, each one 3 times Darwin's size, and it took 4 human soldiers to move a single unconscious Korvathi to safety. They worked for 14 hours without stopping. By the end of it, Darwin's arms were shaking, and his suit was soaked with sweat. But every Korvathi on that ship was alive. One of the Korvathi soldiers, a young one who had regained consciousness while being carried through a dark corridor, looked up at the small human holding him and asked a question in broken common tongue. He asked why. Why were they saving them? They had come to make war on Earth. They had come to put humanity back in its cage. Why would humans save the lives of their enemies? Darwin did not have a good answer for that. He thought about it for a moment, and then he said something simple. He said that this was what humans did. He said that strength without kindness was just cruelty, and that Earth had not built all of this to be cruel. Across the galaxy, the news of Verath 3 spread even faster than the news of the Korvathi retreat. But this time, the story was different. The galaxy had expected Earth to reveal itself as a monster, a hidden predator that had been waiting to devour its neighbors. Instead, the story was about human soldiers pulling alien enemies out of dying ships and saving their lives. The most powerful military display in galactic history, and not a single life was lost. The weapon that could have been an instrument of genocide had been used as a demonstration, and the fleet that could have left 15,000 ships to die in the cold had chosen to rescue every single one of them. It was this, more than the weapon, more than the hidden fleet, more than any show of force, that truly shook the galaxy. Because it meant that humanity had chosen mercy when it had every reason and every ability to choose destruction. And a species that could do that was not just powerful. It was something the galaxy had not seen in a very long time. It was something worth respecting. While the rescue operations continued, Soha finally opened the files on Project Exodus and presented them to the War Cabinet. What she revealed was not a weapon at all. It was a dimensional fold drive, a technology that allowed ships to move into parallel layers of space that existed alongside normal reality, but were completely invisible and inaccessible to any known alien technology. Humanity did not need the 3 star systems the Council had permitted them. They did not need the Council's trade corridors or colonization rights. They had already begun expanding into a dimension that the galaxy could not reach, could not see, and could not even detect. Earth had not just built a bigger fleet, it had found a bigger universe. Tejo wrote the message himself. It was transmitted to every species in the Galactic Council on every frequency, in every language, with no encryption and no restrictions. He wanted everyone to hear it. He called it a doctrine. It was not a declaration of war. It was not a threat. It was a statement of who humanity was and what it would accept. He said that Earth had not asked for respect, but had earned it in silence, while the galaxy laughed. He said that humanity did not want alien worlds or alien empires. He said that Earth wanted only one thing, to never again stand in a room where its right to exist was put to a vote. He said that from that day forward, Earth answered to no council, no coalition, and no mandate but its own. He said the galaxy was welcome as friends and warned as enemies. Choose wisely, he wrote. And the galaxy read those two words and understood that everything had changed. In a dark room on a distant world, Otkin sat alone, with a hologram of the human fleet glowing in front of him. His command had been taken from him. His reputation was destroyed. His species was humiliated. And as he stared at the image of those dark, angular human ships, he finally understood what he had missed from the very beginning. Earth was never the prey. It had always been the predator. It had simply been patient enough to let itself be underestimated. And patience, Otgon realized far too late, was the most dangerous weapon of all. 5 years changed everything. 5 years after the Tejo Doctrine, the galaxy was not the same place it had been when a quiet man in a dark suit stood alone at a pulpit and asked for equality. The old order, built on hierarchies that had lasted for thousands of years, had cracked right down the middle. It had not shattered completely, because civilizations that old do not break easily, but the cracks were deep and they were growing, and what was growing up through them was something new. The Galactic Council still existed. It still met in the Grand Forum, and thousands of species still sent their delegates to argue and negotiate and vote on the matters that shaped interstellar life. But the council that existed now was not the council that had laughed at Earth. That council was gone, buried under the weight of its own arrogance. The first thing to go was the developmental species designation. Lissari had led that fight herself. In the months after Vera 3, she had stood before the council again and again, arguing that the system that classified younger species as inferior was not just wrong, but dangerous. She pointed to Earth as proof. Humanity had been called a developmental species, and the council's response to their growth had been to cage them, mock them, and eventually try to crush them. And where had that led? To the most powerful military force the galaxy had ever seen being shut down by a single ship and rescued by the species it had come to destroy. The system was not just unfair, Lissari argued. It was stupid. It took 2 years of political battles, but the designation was eventually abolished by a council vote. This time, the vote was not close in the other direction. Over 3,000 species voted to remove it. The memory of Vera 3 was still fresh, and no one wanted to be the next civilization to discover what happened when you put a cage around a species that was smarter than you thought. But the change went deeper than just removing a label. Dozens of younger species, inspired by Earth's example, began to demand real representation in the council. They formed coalitions of their own, not military ones, but political alliances that gave them enough collective weight to push for reforms. Trade corridors were opened. Military restrictions on younger species were eased. The old powers grumbled and resisted, but the ground had shifted beneath them, and they knew it. Lissari became one of the most influential diplomats in the Reformed Council. She was respected by the younger species because she had stood with Earth when no one else would. And she was respected by the older species because she had the political skill to push for change without burning everything down. When journalists asked her about her role in the reforms, she always said the same thing. She said that she had not done anything extraordinary. She said that humanity had done the hard part. They were the ones who had refused to accept a cage. All she had done was help the galaxy understand why the cage should never have been built in the first place. She often told a story to younger delegates who were nervous about challenging the old powers. She told them about a human diplomat who had stood alone in the largest room in the galaxy and asked politely and clearly for something that should never have needed asking. And when the room laughed at him, he did not shout, and he did not beg, and he did not give up. He went home, and he changed the game. Do not wait to be given your dignity, she would tell them. The humans taught us that. Tejo himself had stepped away from public life. After the doctrine that bore his name had been transmitted to the galaxy, he had served for 2 more years as Earth's lead diplomatic voice, managing the delicate period of transition as the old order adjusted to the new reality. Then he had resigned quietly, without ceremony, and disappeared from the public eye. He lived now on a colony world in the Exodus dimension, one of the first permanent settlements humanity had built in the parallel layer of space that Soha's technology had opened for them. The world was beautiful in a way that human language was not designed to describe. It had twin suns that rose in colors that existed outside the normal visible spectrum, shades that no human eye had evolved to see, but that Soha's dimensional technology allowed them to perceive. The sky shifted between deep violet and burning gold, and the lighted cast made everything look like a painting that had not yet been finished. Tejo tended a garden there. He grew vegetables and flowers from Earth's seeds, coaxing them to life in alien soil under alien light. When reporters made the long journey to find him and ask him questions, he was always polite. He would offer them tea and sit with them among his plants and answer whatever they wanted to know. When one of them asked if he had any regrets, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said that he wished they had simply said yes when he asked nicely. Admiral Yuna had not retired. She had been given command of the first Exodus fleet, an armada of exploration vessels pushing deeper into the uncharted layers of the Exodus dimension. The space inside the dimensional fold was vast beyond anything humanity had anticipated. Soha had theorized that there might be multiple layers, each one as large as normal space, stacked on top of each other like pages in an infinite book. Yuna's fleet was testing that theory, moving further from known territory with every passing month. 6 months into the expedition, they found something. Structures, not natural formations, but built things, enormous and ancient, and made of materials that human science could not yet identify. They were the remains of civilizations that had existed in the Exodus layers for longer than the Galactic Council had existed in normal space. Most of them were empty. Ruins. Ghost cities, floating in dimensional space, like memories of something that had ended long ago. But some of them were not empty. Some of them had lights. Yuna reported the discovery to Earth with the same flat calm she had used when she told the Korvathi to leave. She said that they had made contact with 3 distinct intelligences so far. They were old, far older than anything in the normal galaxy, and they were curious about the newcomers. Conversations were ongoing. Humanity's next chapter, it seemed, would not be written alone. Dawan was a captain now. He commanded a training vessel attached to the United Earth Navy's academy, and he spent his days teaching a new generation of pilots how to fly ships that would have been considered impossible 10 years ago. His students were not all human. In the years since the Tejo Doctrine, Earth had begun accepting applications from alien species who wanted to serve alongside humanity. The numbers were small at first, just a handful of individuals from species that had quietly admired Earth, or that had their own reasons for wanting to learn from the people who had stared down the galaxy. But the numbers were growing. Dawan treated them all the same. He was tough and fair and patient, and he never let any of his students forget the lesson that he carried with him from the day he had pulled a Korvathi soldier out of a dying ship. Strength meant nothing without the choice to use it well. A weapon you never fired was more powerful than one you did, because it meant you were strong enough to win and wise enough to know that winning was not the point. Jinho had transformed Helix. The weapons programs were still there, maintained and updated, because Hana had taught everyone the value of being prepared. But the focus of the organization had shifted. Helix was now leading a series of shared technology initiatives, carefully offering pieces of declassified human innovation to council species that were willing to engage in genuine partnership. It was slow work. Trust that had been broken on both sides could not be repaired overnight. But Jinho was a patient man, and he understood that the best way to make sure the vaults were never needed again was to build a galaxy that did not require them. Soha led the first joint human-alien research expedition into what the scientists called the Deep Layer, the lowest and most unexplored region of the Exodus dimension. Her team included researchers from 7 different species, all working together in a way that would have been unimaginable 5 years ago. She believed that the layers went further down, possibly infinitely, and that each one contained new physics, new possibilities, and new forms of existence that no one had ever imagined. When she briefed her team before departure, she smiled and said something that was later quoted across the galaxy. She said that humanity had spent 40 years proving it deserved a seat at their table, and now they were building a bigger table. Hana had quietly disbanded most of her spy networks across alien worlds. The need for them had faded as relations between Earth and the Council improved, but she had not disbanded all of them. When Yuna asked her why, during a private dinner on the anniversary of the Tejo Doctrine, Hana poured herself a glass of wine and smiled in that way she had that never quite reached her eyes. She said, "Trust but verify." And she said that was not paranoia, but memory. Yuna did not argue. And then, 5 years and 3 months after the day Tejo first stood at the speaker's pulpit, something happened in the Grand Forum that brought the story full circle. A new species came before the council for the first time. They were small, their delegation was tiny, their technology was modest, their military was almost non-existent, and their flag was hung near the bottom of the chamber, in the same corner where Earth's flag had once been, where the light barely reached. Their ambassador stood at the speaker's pulpit and looked up at the thousands of faces above, and for a moment the history of the room was so heavy it was almost visible in the air. This was the same room where Tejo had been laughed at, the same room where the Ashara Mandate had been passed, the same room where a species had been told it did not matter. The forum was quiet, not with boredom or contempt, but with something else, something that might have been respect, or might have been memory, or might have been the understanding that every species that stood at that pulpit carried the potential to change everything. The new ambassador spoke, and the council listened. And somewhere far away, in a garden between 2 suns that shone in colors that had no name, Tejo looked up from his plants and stared at the impossible sky. He did not know about the new species standing at the pulpit. He did not know that the room had stayed silent. He did not know that the galaxy he had helped reshape was in that moment proving that it had learned something from everything that had happened. But he smiled anyway. He smiled the way a man smiles when he has carried something heavy for a very long time and has finally set it down. He smiled at the sky, and the strange light, and the small green things growing in the alien soil around him. And then he went back to his garden, and the suns moved slowly overhead, and the universe, in all its vast and layered and infinite strangeness, continued to turn, and it turned a little better than it had before.